Detective Lisa Hargrave had been working in the downtown precinct for more than a decade. She was known for her strict approach to law enforcement, her sharp eyes, and her unwillingness to tolerate mistakes. Many of her colleagues respected her efficiency, but others whispered about the way she sometimes let personal feelings interfere with her judgment. Over the past few months, Lisa's attitude toward certain cases had grown harsher. She had little patience for people she considered difficult or uncooperative, and unfortunately, her biases were beginning to show. It was a cold Tuesday morning, and Lisa arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. She was already irritated by a case she had been preparing for weeks, a civil lawsuit involving a major construction company accused of unsafe working conditions. Her mind was crowded with notes, witness statements, and reminders about court rules. She adjusted her jacket, fixed her hair in the mirror of her car, and walked briskly toward the courthouse entrance. The courthouse itself was a large, imposing building with marble floors and high ceilings. The hallways echoed with the footsteps of lawyers, clerks, and defendants moving between cases. Marcus Reynolds walked calmly down one of these hallways. He was wearing a neatly pressed dark suit, carrying a leather folder under his arm. His shoes made a soft, deliberate sound on the marble floor as he moved with quiet confidence. Marcus had a long history in the legal field, and today he was scheduled to testify in a case that could have significant consequences for the construction company. He had prepared for hours, reviewing documents and thinking carefully about how to present his points clearly and professionally. Unlike Lisa, he had learned over the years that calmness and patience were far more effective than aggression. As Marcus passed the courtroom security checkpoint, Lisa was already standing near the entrance, her arms crossed. She noticed him immediately. There was something about the way he carried himself that irritated her. Maybe it was the calmness, or maybe it was just her own prejudice that made her defensive. When Marcus walked by, he gave a polite nod to the security officer, but Lisa interpreted it differently. To her, it seemed like a challenge, a subtle way of showing confidence that she didn't like. She stepped forward, blocking his path slightly, and asked a question about his identification and credentials. Marcus handed over his papers without hesitation. He remained composed, his eyes steady, showing no sign of irritation or fear. Lisa, however, seemed to grow more agitated. Her voice, firm and slightly sharp, carried down the hallway. Other people waiting to enter the courtroom started to take notice. They sensed tension but didn't understand the reason. Some whispered quietly to one another, curious about what was happening. The brief exchange escalated quickly. Lisa, feeling a need to assert authority, made a comment that was unnecessarily critical. She suggested, in a tone that was more mocking than professional, that Marcus might not understand the seriousness of the court proceedings. Marcus paused, then replied calmly and respectfully, explaining that he was well aware of the process and that he was fully prepared to provide testimony. The calmness in his voice only seemed to frustrate Lisa further. She expected confrontation, fear, or hesitation, but Marcus had none. The officers stationed nearby sensed the rising tension. They were trained to intervene if needed, but they also knew Lisa could be unpredictable. One officer stepped slightly closer, a subtle reminder that the situation needed to stay under control. People in the hallway began noticing the standoff. Some were witnesses to cases. Others were staff members who had seen disputes before. They could feel the energy of the interaction, the silent challenge between two very different personalities. Lisa's frustration was growing. She had encountered many people in her career, but Marcus's composure was unusual. She frowned, her eyes narrowing as she watched him gather his notes. Marcus, on the other hand, remained focused, seemingly unaware or unconcerned with the tension building around him. He continued to organize his folder and review his documents, displaying the kind of quiet confidence that often comes from years of experience and preparation. Finally, a court officer approached Lisa and quietly reminded her that she needed to let Marcus proceed to the courtroom. She hesitated, unwilling to give up control, but the officer's calm presence made her step back just enough. Marcus thanked the officer politely and walked toward the courtroom. Lisa watched him go, her face showing a mixture of irritation and disbelief. She could not understand why he had not reacted the way she expected. She had dealt with many defendants who flinched, who seemed nervous or unsure, but Marcus appeared completely unshaken. Once inside the courtroom, Marcus took his seat and opened his folder. He arranged his documents neatly, placing the papers he would refer to during testimony in order. The judge, a patient and experienced man, entered shortly afterward. He greeted everyone politely and began calling the court to order. Lisa took her place as well, her posture tense. She was determined to assert authority during the proceedings, and she intended to make sure Marcus knew his place, as she put it to herself. Marcus, however, continued to maintain calm professionalism. He listened carefully to the proceedings, taking notes when necessary, and waited for the judge to direct him. As the questioning began, Lisa's style quickly became apparent. She asked pointed questions that seemed designed not only to clarify details but also to challenge Marcus personally. Her tone carried an edge of impatience and condescension. Marcus answered every question fully, giving clear, precise responses. He did not argue or show anger, but his calmness made Lisa's approach appear petty and overbearing to others in the courtroom. Observers began to notice the imbalance. Some of the staff and reporters present exchanged subtle glances, recognizing that Marcus was handling the situation with remarkable poise. During the early part of the testimony, Lisa tried to intimidate Marcus with small comments and interruptions. She asked questions that were not entirely relevant to the case, seemingly hoping to catch him off guard. Marcus remained focused, politely redirecting the conversation back to the main points of the case. His ability to stay composed under pressure frustrated Lisa even further. She had underestimated him from the start, and now it was clear that her tactics were ineffective. Marcus's calm, deliberate manner not only helped the case, but also highlighted her own impatience and lack of professionalism. The courtroom continued to fill with tension as the exchange went on. Every time Lisa tried to assert dominance, Marcus responded with quiet confidence. The judge intervened a few times, reminding Lisa to keep her questions relevant and professional. Other officers and staff watched silently, aware that Lisa's behavior might soon lead to trouble for her career. Some were concerned, wondering if the situation would escalate into a public confrontation. Marcus, however, remained undisturbed, following every instruction, speaking only when necessary, and never losing his composure. By mid-morning, it became clear to many in the courtroom that Lisa was losing control. Her face showed signs of frustration and confusion. She did not understand why Marcus remained calm or why her usual tactics were not working. She had underestimated him entirely. People in the courtroom, including staff and reporters, began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The focus had moved from Lisa's aggressive style to Marcus's professionalism. Even those who were not familiar with either party sensed the contrast. One person consumed by bias and frustration, the other calm, prepared, and respectful. At one point, Marcus paused and looked up, making eye contact with Lisa. He did not say anything, but his gaze was steady and unshaken. It was a silent message. He would not be intimidated. Lisa blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She had expected a different reaction, nervousness, fear, or anger, but Marcus's presence was unshakable. She stepped back slightly, trying to regain control, but it was clear that the courtroom dynamic had shifted. By the time the first part of the proceedings concluded, whispers had started circulating among the staff and other observers. Some recognized Marcus, though they did not immediately disclose who he was. There was a sense that something unusual was happening, that the man in the suit was not an ordinary witness. Lisa, meanwhile, was left fuming quietly, trying to regain her composure and plan her next move. She did not yet realize that this confrontation would be more than a personal embarrassment. It would soon reveal the true identity of Marcus Reynolds and dramatically change how she was viewed, not only in the courtroom but also by her colleagues and the public. Marcus packed up his documents neatly, preparing for the next session. He remained polite and professional, greeting the judge and staff as he moved. Lisa watched, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. She had intended to assert authority, to demonstrate control, but instead she had been shown up, and not in a way that could be ignored. For the first time in a long while, she felt uncertain about the outcome. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his quiet, steady approach, unaware that the revelation of his true identity was about to make an even greater impact on the courtroom and on Lisa herself. The courtroom had settled into a tense rhythm after the initial exchange between Lisa Hargrave and Marcus Reynolds. Marcus sat quietly reviewing his notes while Lisa continued to eye him from across the room. She had hoped that once the formal questioning began, she could regain control, but every attempt seemed to only highlight his calmness and professionalism. The judge, noticing the tension, tried to keep the session moving smoothly. He reminded everyone to maintain respect and focus on the case at hand. His voice carried authority, and for a moment the room fell silent. Even Lisa's colleagues, who were used to her aggressive style, began to sense that this encounter was different from any other. Marcus had been through many courtrooms in his life, and he knew how to read the energy of the room. He could sense that Lisa's hostility was personal rather than professional. He had learned that the best way to deal with such situations was to remain calm, answer questions truthfully, and not let emotions take control. Today, that approach was paying off. Each time Lisa asked a challenging question, Marcus responded in a polite, measured tone. He made sure to provide clear explanations and facts, leaving no room for misinterpretation. His words carried weight, and soon the people in the courtroom started to notice the stark difference between his approach and Lisa's. Lisa, growing more frustrated, tried a new tactic. She leaned forward, her tone sharper, and asked questions that were intended to unsettle Marcus. She implied that he might be exaggerating or misrepresenting facts, even though there was no evidence to support such claims. Marcus, however, remained steady. He answered every point logically and calmly, never raising his voice. It was almost as if he had anticipated her behavior and was prepared for it. The more he stayed composed, the more Lisa's attempts at intimidation seemed to backfire. People in the courtroom began exchanging glances. Some of the clerks and officers whispered to each other, noting how unusual it was to see Lisa appear flustered while a witness remained completely unshaken. As the session continued, Marcus began to provide detailed accounts of the incidents related to the case. He referred to documents, emails, and reports, presenting them clearly and systematically. His professionalism was impressive. Each answer he gave highlighted his knowledge, experience, and dedication to truth. Lisa's strategy, which relied on aggression and subtle intimidation, was ineffective. She felt her authority slipping, but she didn't want to admit it. Her frustration showed in small ways: a tightened jaw, a sharp glance, and the occasional exasperated sigh. The tension in the room was building, and it was no longer a quiet struggle between two individuals. It was becoming a clear demonstration of how calm confidence could overpower hostility. The judge, recognizing the growing tension, intervened gently but firmly. He reminded Lisa to focus on relevant questions and to maintain a professional demeanor. He did not chastise her openly, but his words were enough to remind everyone that decorum was expected in his courtroom. Lisa straightened in her seat, masking her irritation with a forced calm. However, her eyes continued to follow Marcus closely, studying his every move. She could not understand why he was not reacting like others had in the past. Most witnesses, especially in high-pressure cases, would show at least some sign of nervousness. But Marcus remained composed, almost serene. This only fueled her determination to regain control, though she was increasingly aware that her usual tactics were not working. Meanwhile, Marcus could feel the subtle shifts in the room. He noticed that some of the officers and staff were paying extra attention to him. Their reaction suggested that he was not just another witness. He did not know yet how much they already suspected, but he could tell that his calm presence had captured the attention of everyone, including those who might normally side with Lisa. Marcus's experience in law enforcement and legal affairs had taught him the value of quiet authority. He did not need to raise his voice or assert dominance overtly. His composure was already doing that for him. Every answer he gave, every careful explanation, reinforced his credibility and professional integrity. At one point, Lisa attempted a direct challenge. She asked a question that was meant to test Marcus personally, something she hoped would make him stumble. Marcus listened carefully, paused briefly to ensure his response was accurate, and then answered clearly and confidently. His response was precise and fact-based, leaving no room for argument. The people in the courtroom reacted subtly. Some nodded in agreement, some glanced at each other with quiet acknowledgement of his expertise. Lisa's expression, on the other hand, tightened further. She realized that her words, meant to unsettle him, were having the opposite effect. Marcus's calm answers made her appear impulsive and aggressive in comparison. By now, some of the reporters present had started taking notes more intently. They sensed that this confrontation was more than a standard courtroom exchange. They observed Lisa's frustration and Marcus's calm authority, recognizing that this story could have wider implications if it became public. Journalists are trained to notice such dynamics, and the subtle tension in the courtroom did not escape them. They quietly documented the scene, capturing the contrast between aggression and professionalism, bias and calm judgment. As the questioning continued, Marcus referred to specific reports that highlighted issues within the construction company. He spoke clearly and with evidence, making sure that his testimony was organized and easy to understand. Every time Lisa tried to interrupt or challenge him unnecessarily, he gently redirected the conversation back to the relevant facts. His demeanor conveyed not only confidence but also respect for the court and the process. This approach began to sway the mood of the courtroom subtly. Even officers who had initially sided with Lisa began to shift their attention toward Marcus's testimony, recognizing the thoroughness and clarity he brought to the case. During a short break, Marcus reviewed his notes again. He knew that the next segment of questioning would be crucial, and he wanted to be fully prepared. Lisa, meanwhile, sat at her desk fuming silently. She could feel that the balance of power in the courtroom had shifted, though she did not yet understand why. Marcus's calm presence had not only neutralized her attempts at intimidation, but had also earned the subtle respect of the people around him. She had been accustomed to having witnesses react the way she expected, but this time, her usual authority had been challenged by his composed professionalism. When the session resumed, Marcus continued his testimony with poise. He answered questions in detail, referring to documents, timelines, and evidence. Each response reinforced his credibility. Lisa, now visibly tense, tried to regain control by asking more pointed questions, but Marcus anticipated the challenges. He remained courteous, respectful, and factual. His steady approach made her increasingly aware that her attempts to intimidate him were failing. People in the courtroom, from the judge to the officers and staff, were noticing this dynamic. The murmurs began again, quieter this time, as those present recognized that Marcus was more than just an ordinary witness. By the end of the morning session, it was clear that Marcus had earned the quiet admiration of many in the courtroom. He had handled Lisa's aggression with dignity and had presented his testimony in a way that was clear, compelling, and professional. Lisa, on the other hand, left the courtroom feeling frustrated and confused. She could not understand how her usual methods had failed so completely. She had expected resistance, hesitation, and perhaps even fear, but Marcus had remained completely composed throughout. As everyone prepared for the next part of the proceedings, Marcus quietly packed his documents, ready to continue when the judge called the session back to order. He had maintained his calm and, in doing so, had subtly shifted the dynamics of the courtroom. Lisa, meanwhile, was forced to reflect, if only briefly, on the realization that her approach had not only failed, but had also made her appear unprofessional in front of colleagues, officers, and reporters. The stage was now set for an even greater revelation, one that would soon expose Marcus's true identity and completely change the power dynamic in the courtroom. By midday, the tension in the courtroom had reached a subtle but noticeable shift. Marcus Reynolds had proven his calmness and professionalism, and many present began to sense that he was more than just a witness. Some of the court staff, quietly observing the proceedings, exchanged curious glances. They recognized the precision of his statements, the clarity in his responses, and the quiet authority he carried with him. Marcus seemed almost untouchable in his composure. Lisa Hargrave, however, remained oblivious to the whispers around her. She was focused solely on regaining control, convinced that her persistence would eventually unnerve him. Marcus knew the next segment of the hearing would require careful attention. He opened his folder and organized his notes, preparing to address more detailed questions from both the court and Lisa. His eyes scanned the documents one more time, ensuring that he had all the facts at his fingertips. His methodical preparation reflected years of experience in legal and law enforcement work. Every detail mattered to him, not just for the case itself, but for the integrity of the system. He believed in professionalism, respect, and truth above all else. As Lisa prepared to question him again, Marcus noticed subtle shifts in the behavior of those around her. Officers who had initially sided with Lisa were now paying more attention to him. Clerks and court reporters seemed intrigued, whispering quietly among themselves. Some of them had recognized Marcus from previous high-profile work, though they had not yet made a public acknowledgement. Marcus did not seek recognition. He had learned that maintaining focus and professionalism was far more important than attention or praise. Still, he could sense the quiet acknowledgement growing, a subtle tension that suggested something was about to change. Lisa, unaware of the growing curiosity and recognition surrounding Marcus, leaned forward and posed another series of challenging questions. Her tone was sharper now, her impatience evident. She attempted to poke holes in his testimony, hoping to catch him off guard. Marcus listened carefully, processing each question with patience. He did not rush his answers, nor did he show any sign of irritation. Instead, he responded thoughtfully, citing specific documents, dates, and facts. His detailed, precise responses left little room for debate or contradiction. The courtroom seemed to shift slightly as Marcus spoke. Even the judge, who had seen countless witnesses and legal confrontations over the years, noted the difference in the energy of this session. Marcus's calm authority contrasted sharply with Lisa's increasing frustration. It was not just about who was right in the case anymore. It had become a demonstration of character, composure, and professionalism. Some of the staff began taking extra notes, anticipating that this courtroom confrontation might make a significant story once it reached the public eye. During a brief recess, Marcus received a quiet message on his phone. It was from a close colleague, confirming that the courtroom encounter was already drawing attention outside. Journalists and media outlets had begun to notice the dynamic between him and Lisa. Marcus read the message calmly, noting the growing public interest. He understood that this moment was delicate and that any misstep could escalate tensions or distract from the facts of the case. With careful thought, he put his phone away and continued to focus on his testimony. Lisa, meanwhile, felt a subtle unease she could not explain. She had noticed the way some officers and court staff were glancing toward Marcus, whispering among themselves. She tried to convince herself that it was routine courtroom observation, but a small part of her began to feel something unusual was happening. Her confidence, which had been strong all morning, started to waver just slightly. Marcus, sitting quietly and reviewing his documents, remained oblivious to her internal struggle. His focus was entirely on the case and on providing accurate testimony. As the hearing resumed, Marcus began to present even more detailed evidence. He referenced emails, official reports, and prior case studies, explaining how each piece of information related to the current case. His delivery was calm and precise, each point made clearly and logically. Observers could see that he was methodical and well-prepared. Lisa attempted to interject, hoping to challenge his credibility, but Marcus's composed responses made her attempts appear reactive rather than authoritative. The courtroom atmosphere began to subtly favor Marcus, as the contrast between his professionalism and Lisa's frustration became increasingly obvious. At one point, a reporter quietly approached the edge of the courtroom and took note of Marcus's presence. They recognized him immediately. Marcus Reynolds was not just an ordinary witness. He held a prominent position in a national law enforcement oversight committee, responsible for monitoring police conduct and advocating for justice reform. His identity was not widely known to the public yet, but those familiar with his work understood the significance of his presence. The reporter's pen moved quickly, capturing not just the testimony but the dynamics between Marcus and Lisa. The quiet acknowledgement of his role added weight to the situation, though Marcus himself remained unaware of how much attention he was drawing. Lisa's frustration grew as the courtroom began to subtly shift its focus. People were listening more to Marcus than to her, and her sharp tone seemed to make her appear less professional in comparison. She tried to regain control, asking pointed questions about details she hoped would confuse him, but Marcus responded with clarity and calmness. Each answer reinforced his credibility, while her attempts at dominance only highlighted her growing agitation. The contrast was evident, even to those who had initially assumed she held the upper hand. The judge, noticing the tension, decided to interject. He reminded Lisa to maintain professionalism and focus on relevant questions. His tone was firm but neutral. Lisa straightened in her seat, masking her growing concern with a veneer of composure. Yet deep down, she could feel that the power dynamic was subtly changing. Marcus's calm presence, methodical explanations, and professional demeanor were gradually earning the silent respect of the courtroom staff, officers, and even some of Lisa's colleagues. Marcus continued to provide evidence with precision. He explained the sequence of events, highlighted important documents, and addressed potential inconsistencies in a neutral, factual manner. His approach was deliberate, measured, and confident. Every answer he gave reinforced his authority and credibility. Lisa's attempts to assert dominance through tone and sharp questioning seemed increasingly ineffective. The more she tried to challenge him, the more his calm and professional responses highlighted her own frustration and impatience. By mid-afternoon, a quiet realization began to settle in the courtroom. Marcus Reynolds was not an ordinary witness. He was a person of influence, experience, and authority. While Lisa remained unaware of his exact identity, the people around her began to sense that the stakes were higher than they initially thought. Observers could see the shift. Marcus's professionalism was commanding respect, while Lisa's aggression was drawing quiet scrutiny. The tension was no longer just between two individuals. It had become a larger story about authority, composure, and credibility. Marcus finished a segment of his testimony, pausing to organize his documents. He remained calm, acknowledging the judge's instructions politely. He had handled the confrontation with Lisa perfectly, maintaining focus on the case while navigating the courtroom dynamics with skill. Lisa, meanwhile, could feel that her strategy had not succeeded. She had intended to challenge him, to assert authority and perhaps even intimidate, but Marcus had remained composed, professional, and unshakable. Her face showed subtle signs of discomfort, though she tried to hide them. Outside the courtroom, reporters began to speculate on the dynamic they had witnessed. Marcus's calm demeanor, clarity, and authority had made an impression. Even though his identity was not yet public knowledge, those familiar with law enforcement and justice reform began to recognize him. They noted how he handled aggression and bias with professionalism, and how the courtroom had subtly shifted in his favor. Marcus remained unaware of the attention, focused entirely on his testimony and the facts at hand. As the day progressed, Marcus prepared for the final portion of his testimony. He knew that he would soon be required to state his credentials and professional experience publicly. That moment would reveal the truth about his identity and further shift the courtroom dynamic. Lisa, still focused on trying to regain control, remained unaware of the full weight of the situation. Marcus's calm and professional approach had already set the stage for a dramatic revelation that would soon make her realize the magnitude of the man she had been confronting all morning. The courtroom grew unusually quiet as the judge prepared to continue. Marcus Reynolds had just finished another portion of his testimony, and the energy in the room was changing. Observers could sense something significant was about to happen, though most had no idea what it would be. Marcus sat upright, calm and focused, carefully arranging his notes. His composure had remained steady all morning, and his methodical approach to the questions had impressed everyone present. Lisa Hargrave, however, was growing more uneasy. She had expected resistance, nervousness, or even fear from Marcus, but there was none. She had underestimated him, and now that realization was beginning to sink in, though she did not yet know the full story. The judge called for the next part of the proceedings, asking Marcus to state his full credentials and professional background before continuing. Marcus nodded politely, organizing the documents on the table in front of him. He cleared his throat, speaking in a calm, deliberate tone that carried across the courtroom. Your Honor, for clarity and context, I would like to provide my full professional title and background so that all parties understand my perspective on the matters at hand. Everyone in the courtroom leaned slightly forward. Even Lisa, though trying to maintain her composure, could sense that something important was coming. Her instinct told her that this information might change how the room viewed the entire case. Marcus began to speak clearly, his words measured and precise. I am Marcus Reynolds, currently serving as the chair of the National Law Enforcement Oversight Committee. My responsibilities include reviewing police conduct, advising on justice reform policies, and ensuring accountability within law enforcement agencies across the country. I have spent over 15 years in legal and investigative roles, focusing on fairness, integrity, and the protection of civil rights. As he spoke, murmurs began to ripple quietly through the courtroom. People who had recognized him earlier began exchanging glances, confirming what they already suspected. Marcus's presence, which had seemed ordinary at first, was now revealing its full significance. Lisa's eyes widened slightly as she realized the magnitude of the revelation. She had been so focused on trying to assert authority that she had not considered who she was actually confronting. Marcus Reynolds was not just a witness or a legal professional. He held national authority over police conduct and reform. He had the power to review actions taken by officers, including those within her own precinct. Lisa felt a sudden chill run down her spine. Her confidence, which had been unwavering all morning, faltered in an instant. The courtroom that had felt familiar and controlled now seemed unpredictable and charged with tension. Observers in the courtroom, from clerks to officers, began to notice Lisa's reaction. Her posture stiffened, and her usually confident expression now showed subtle signs of alarm. Marcus, fully aware of the situation but maintaining his professionalism, continued speaking. He did not raise his voice or gloat. He simply presented his credentials and experience, letting the facts speak for themselves. His calm authority contrasted sharply with Lisa's growing discomfort. For the first time, she realized that her usual tactics of intimidation and assertiveness had failed completely. Marcus then addressed the judge and all present in the courtroom with careful words. "I understand the importance of this case and the need for accurate testimony. My goal here is not to exert power but to provide clarity, ensure the truth is understood, and support fair proceedings." His words were respectful, precise, and commanding at the same time. The murmurs in the courtroom grew slightly louder as people began to understand the significance of his presence. Reporters quickly adjusted their notes, capturing every detail, knowing that this revelation could become a major story. Lisa's mind raced. She realized that she had inadvertently placed herself in a highly vulnerable position. By confronting Marcus aggressively, she had underestimated not only his expertise but also his authority. She had assumed that a witness of any kind would respond with nervousness or hesitation, but Marcus had remained composed and factual the entire time. Now, with his credentials publicly stated, she understood that any further attempts at intimidation could have serious consequences for her career. She tried to regain control, straightening her posture and taking a deep breath, but the subtle signs of panic were evident. Her face had turned slightly pale, and she avoided direct eye contact with him, a stark contrast to her usual boldness. Marcus continued calmly, referring back to his prepared notes. He explained the evidence he had gathered and the observations he had made in his professional capacity. Every point he made was precise, factual, and relevant to the case. The courtroom, which had previously been tense and uncertain, began to shift in his favor. Observers noted the stark contrast between his measured professionalism and Lisa's increasingly reactive demeanor. It was clear that Marcus's authority and calm presence had completely changed the dynamics of the courtroom. The judge, who had been quietly observing, nodded subtly. He recognized the importance of Marcus's role and the credibility his testimony brought to the case. Lisa, now fully aware of the shift, struggled to maintain the upper hand. She asked a few more questions, but her tone had softened slightly, and her attempts to challenge Marcus were less aggressive than before. She realized that any misstep could be noticed not only by the judge but also by the officers, staff, and reporters present. Marcus remained unfazed. He answered every question thoughtfully, maintaining the same level of calm and precision that had characterized his testimony all morning. As Marcus continued, the courtroom began to recognize his significance more broadly. Clerks, officers, and other staff members who had only known him by reputation now understood that he was the individual who had national authority over law enforcement conduct. His presence commanded respect naturally, without the need for any overt display of power. Lisa's attempts at dominance, which had seemed routine in other cases, now appeared ineffective and even misguided. She could feel the eyes of the courtroom subtly judging her actions, and the realization of her miscalculation weighed heavily on her. Reporters quietly adjusted their positions, ready to capture every detail of the unfolding story. They recognized the tension, the dramatic revelation of Marcus's identity, and the visible shift in Lisa's demeanor. Cameras and notepads documented the courtroom atmosphere, capturing the way one individual's calm authority could entirely change the dynamics of a room filled with people accustomed to conventional hierarchies. Marcus himself remained focused on the facts, his demeanor composed and professional. He was not there to embarrass anyone but to provide clear, factual testimony that would aid the case. Lisa's discomfort became more noticeable as the session continued. She tried to interject at times, but Marcus's calm responses and clear explanations left little room for confrontation. Each time she asked a challenging question, he answered with professionalism and dignity, reinforcing the authority he had just revealed. Observers in the courtroom began to murmur quietly, recognizing the dramatic contrast between the two individuals. Marcus's calm, methodical approach had completely outshone Lisa's aggressive and reactive style. By mid-afternoon, the courtroom atmosphere had changed entirely. Marcus Reynolds had established himself as a figure of authority and respect. His credentials, clear testimony, and composed demeanor had shifted the balance of power. Lisa Hargrave, now fully aware of the weight of his position, felt a growing sense of panic. She understood that her aggressive approach had failed and that her credibility could be questioned. Her usual confidence had been replaced by caution, and her attempts to regain authority were noticeably restrained. Marcus concluded the segment by summarizing key points from his testimony, reinforcing the evidence he had presented, and confirming the relevance of his observations. His words were deliberate, calm, and authoritative. The courtroom, which had been tense and uncertain earlier, now reflected respect and attentiveness toward him. Lisa, although trying to maintain a professional appearance, could not hide the subtle signs of alarm on her face. Her previous attempts at intimidation had not only failed, but had inadvertently highlighted Marcus's calm authority. The judge called for a brief recess, and people began to stretch, whisper, and move quietly in the courtroom. Lisa remained seated, her mind racing. She realized that the confrontation had gone far beyond a routine courtroom exchange. Marcus's true identity had shifted the dynamics, making her previous behavior appear unprofessional and reactive. She could sense that the entire session had been observed, and any misstep could have consequences for her career. Marcus, meanwhile, remained composed and professional, reviewing his notes quietly and preparing for the next part of the proceedings. The brief recess ended and the courtroom slowly refilled. Marcus Reynolds returned to his seat, composed and calm, while Lisa Hargrave adjusted her jacket, trying to appear collected. The energy in the room was different now. People had seen the revelation of Marcus's true identity, and it had created a quiet buzz among officers, staff, and observers. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and Lisa felt the weight of that shift pressing on her shoulders. She had spent the entire morning attempting to assert control, only to realize that the man in front of her was far more experienced, authoritative, and composed than she could have imagined. Marcus opened his folder and reviewed his notes one last time before continuing. He knew that the final part of his testimony would be crucial. Every word, every detail needed to be precise, not only for the sake of the case but also to maintain professionalism in the courtroom. His calm demeanor reassured those present that he was focused entirely on the facts and the truth. No matter the tension, Marcus remained steady, prepared to answer every question and to clarify every point if needed. Lisa tried to recover some control as the session resumed. She asked a few additional questions, attempting to challenge Marcus in areas she thought might be weak or overlooked. However, Marcus's prepared responses and authoritative presence left her attempts ineffective. Each time she posed a question, he answered with patience, providing detailed explanations, citing documents, and keeping the focus on the facts of the case. The courtroom was captivated by the contrast between her growing frustration and his steady professionalism. Observers began to see a larger lesson unfolding, one about composure, preparation, and integrity in the face of aggression. The judge, recognizing the importance of Marcus's testimony and the shift in the courtroom, remained silent for the most part, allowing the proceedings to unfold naturally. He occasionally nodded in acknowledgement as Marcus addressed questions thoroughly and factually. His confidence and careful articulation made it clear that he commanded respect, even without raising his voice. Lisa, now more cautious, realized that she had little room to maneuver. Her usual strategies of intimidation and assertiveness no longer applied. As Marcus continued, he summarized his points clearly, connecting the evidence he had presented earlier with his professional insights. He explained the broader context of the case, highlighting how proper procedures and ethical oversight could prevent issues like those being discussed. His words were calm yet firm, demonstrating a deep understanding of law enforcement, accountability, and justice. Those present, including officers, staff, and reporters, began to appreciate not only his knowledge but also his ability to handle tension gracefully. Lisa's discomfort became more apparent as the testimony went on. Her usual confidence was replaced with careful restraint. She tried to interject, but Marcus's calm, factual responses made it difficult for her to maintain dominance. The subtle shift in the courtroom dynamic was evident to everyone. People could sense that Marcus's professionalism had earned respect, while Lisa's aggressive approach now appeared misguided and counterproductive. Her earlier attempts to intimidate him had only highlighted his calm authority. During a short break, a few reporters quietly approached Marcus to confirm his identity. They realized that his presence in the courtroom had significance beyond the immediate case. He was the chair of the National Law Enforcement Oversight Committee, a position that carried substantial influence over police conduct and reform initiatives across the country. The reporters quietly documented the situation, noting the tension between Marcus and Lisa, and the courtroom's reaction to his calm authority. Marcus remained focused, reviewing his notes, and did not let the attention distract him. When the session resumed, Marcus addressed the remaining questions with precision. He provided clear, concise answers, always grounding his responses in evidence and professional insight. Lisa, now visibly tense, struggled to regain her earlier confidence. She realized that her confrontational approach had failed entirely, and that Marcus had handled the entire situation with dignity and authority. Observers continued to notice the contrast, recognizing the importance of his composure and expertise. As the hearing drew to a close, Marcus delivered his final statements. He emphasized the importance of fairness, accountability, and integrity in all aspects of law enforcement and legal proceedings. His words were not only factual but also conveyed a sense of moral authority. The courtroom, which had been tense and uncertain earlier, was now filled with quiet respect for his professionalism. People were taking note of his careful balance of calmness, knowledge, and authority. Lisa, realizing that the proceedings had ended, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. She had survived the confrontation, but she knew that her actions would not go unnoticed. Her colleagues, the officers, and even the judge had observed her approach and Marcus's response. The realization that she had underestimated Marcus Reynolds weighed heavily on her. She understood that the confrontation had not only highlighted his authority but also exposed her own misjudgment. Outside the courtroom, Marcus left quietly, maintaining the same composed demeanor he had displayed all morning. Reporters quickly gathered to document the scene, capturing the tension, the revelation of his identity, and the contrast between his professionalism and Lisa's aggressive approach. Marcus did not engage in any confrontation or dramatics. He simply focused on the facts and the integrity of the process. His calm and dignified exit left a lasting impression on everyone present. Lisa, meanwhile, was called aside by her supervisor for a private conversation. The discussion was serious but professional. Her behavior in the courtroom had been observed, and the revelation of Marcus's authority had highlighted the need for reflection and accountability. Lisa listened carefully, acknowledging her missteps and understanding the broader implications of her actions. She realized that confronting someone without understanding their expertise or authority could have consequences not only for her career but also for the perception of her professionalism within the department. In the days following the court session, the story of the confrontation began to spread quietly through professional channels. Marcus's calm and dignified handling of the situation became a model for dealing with aggression and bias in professional settings. Observers noted how his composure had shifted the dynamic entirely, demonstrating the power of preparation, calmness, and integrity. Lisa, reflecting on the experience, recognized the lessons in humility, patience, and professionalism. She understood that true authority was earned through knowledge, preparation, and respect, rather than through aggression or intimidation. The case itself continued, but Marcus's testimony had set a standard. His careful and factual approach reinforced the importance of ethical conduct and accountability in legal and law enforcement work. Those who had witnessed the courtroom interaction carried the lessons forward, recognizing how professionalism and calm authority could influence outcomes, change perceptions, and highlight integrity. Lisa's experience in the courtroom remained with her as a turning point in her career. She became more aware of how her actions were perceived, and how underestimating someone based on bias or assumption could have significant consequences. She learned that respect, preparation, and patience were more powerful than forceful or aggressive approaches. Marcus Reynolds's calm authority and professional presence had not only resolved the situation in the courtroom, but had also taught a lasting lesson about integrity, humility, and the importance of measured action. By the time the court session officially ended, everyone present had gained something from the experience. Marcus had demonstrated that composure, knowledge, and professionalism could overcome aggression and bias. Lisa had learned the importance of reflection, humility, and respect in her work. Observers, reporters, and colleagues understood the broader implications, that authority and credibility are earned, not demanded, and that calm professionalism can shift even the most tense situations. Marcus's actions became a quiet yet powerful example of how integrity, patience, and expertise can create lasting impact, both in a courtroom and beyond. As the day came to a close, Marcus left the courthouse with his usual calm demeanor. The story of the courtroom confrontation would eventually reach a wider audience, illustrating the lessons learned from the experience. Lisa, meanwhile, reflected on the events, realizing that her behavior had been a catalyst for understanding the true weight of professional authority. The incident left a mark on her, the courtroom, and all who had witnessed it, proving that respect, preparation, and calm determination are far more powerful than aggression or prejudice in any professional setting.